Alright, so here we go. Let's get this guy going. The snap ring on the end right here is what holds the shaft in. There's not a whole lot of spring pressure back here, so don't worry about it launching across the room too much. I just want to get a screwdriver in there and pop that sucker off. And then the shaft should pull right out. Theoretically. Cooperate. There it goes. Didn't want to cooperate, but it came out. You can see the shaft's perfectly fine. It's just some junk built up in there. Now, the bottom side here is where we need to add a spring. There's a spring underneath this. Alright, so here's the servo. We're going to change the inner spring now and move it over to the new servo kit. So first thing we need to do is compress the spring. It's a spring down inside here, held on by a snap ring right there. So I like to use a pair of these. You can use whatever method you think fits. Get your C-clamp. You don't need to put too much pressure on it. It's not a terribly big spring. Just want to take the tension off of that snap ring so it doesn't turn into a Jesus clip on you. And the spring comes launching out. And of course you'll need to compress the spring to put the snap ring back in. So once the snap ring gets out of there, get that out of the way, we can release this. And as you can see, there isn't a whole lot of travel to it. It doesn't really go anywhere. So that comes off, and then we've got a bigger spring, and that's it. So this is junk. We're gonna clean off the old spring on the cover, and I'm gonna give this a hose out with some brake clean. Make sure I get any grit or anything out of there. Especially with automatic transmissions, really cleanliness is the key. Any grit, any dust, any sand, any junk that gets in there can give you fits down the road. So keep it as clean as possible. And I'm going to hose this stuff out. Let me grab some cleaner. Oh, nice, nice. And we'll take our new piston, new servo set. Here's the spring that comes with the Transgo shift reprogram kit. So that goes down inside the old spring. So you're adding a spring to the setup as well as using the new Corvette style size servo. Whoopsie. Put that back on there. Just clears the snap. So that just clears the snap ring groove there. Slide the old snap ring back in. Orientation isn't really relevant. The snap ring isn't under a lot of pressure. It's not a biased part that needs to go a certain direction. So that's in. I'm going to release the clamp. That's that. Now we're ready to slide the shaft back in. There we go. That's all the way in. Old spring, collar, and then we need to install the snap ring. And as you can see, the snap ring grooves right there. This spring doesn't hold a whole lot of pressure, so we're not worried too much about using a compressor or anything on it. And that's it. We're good. All right, so the second apply piston has a scarf joint seal. As you can see, it seams together like that. So that just slips over and in. And I'm going to use a little bit of trans gel on here to hold it in. This is good stuff. I know a lot of old timers in the old days we used to use Vaseline in some cases or in a pinch, but I don't necessarily recommend that with trans gel. so readily available. And the difference is really transgel dissolves at a much lower temperature into the oil and then essentially disappears. Sometimes using Vaseline, you'll end up with junk floating around. And like I said, cleanliness is everything. The last thing I want is junk floating around, potentially sticking up the valve body. So I'm going to use a little bit of transgel to hold this in. That way it retracts. I don't want these edges to get hooked up on the bore when I slide it back into the transmission. And these two joints come together right there. Get over there, you. And now I can press this seal right down into the bore here, into the relief, and it'll stay in there during install. And then of course you can lube the seal up a little bit with the transgel. This is good stuff. This particular brand I think is Assembly Goo, I think. Yeah, Assembly Goo. There's a brand named Transgel as well that used to be my go-to, the red stuff, and this stuff works just as well. The green stuff's a little tackier. A little thicker. They make a blue version, it's a little lighter. Since I'm in Florida, temperatures are high here. I go for the thicker stuff that's going to stay on there. So the wider O-ring goes on the servo housing, this is called. And this will drop right into the groove. That's there again. A little bit of transgel for lube. Make sure we don't nick any seals on the way in. There's already a factory installed Teflon seal down in between these two and the seam here. I did slide that apart and verify it's there. It's in good shape and lubed it up. These guys are actually going to, once we get this installed in the case, these are going to want to sit up here. They give you two of them. You may need just one. You may need none of them. You may need both. Depends on how much end play we get between the cover and the end of the servo. This fourth apply is going to sit up here, and then the seals to the inside of the servo cover. And what you want is you want this thing to have a certain amount of end play, which is travel on the band. If you set this up too tight, you don't put any shims in, you need them, or put both shims in and you don't need them, you can push this servo out into the trans and keep the band applied. So what we're going to do is we'll install this and we'll make sure we have a certain amount of end play in the cover, which tells us, because it's going to bottom against the shaft. The servo cover can actually slide all the way into the servo bore quite a bit, further than this will allow it to. So if it can slide in too far, then we know that there's too much travel between the two. We need to make sure this only has about 1/8 of an inch of gap when it's installed in the trans, and that will give us the proper band apply. And then of course we'll verify by turning the drive shaft. So we're going to go ahead and get this sucker in the trans. Slide this guy right in. Oop, almost forgot. Almost forgot. There you go. And I'm just spinning this around to make sure that spring seats on the back side. And we're going to get a fourth apply. Nice and cleaned off. Alright, now the cover. Notice I have put no O-ring on the outside of this cover. You don't want to put it on yet because you have to cut it. 9 times out of 10 it's easiest to cut that O-ring to get the cover out of the trans. Once it's O-ring's installed, it'll get hung up in that snap ring groove. We're going to slide this guy on with nothing on it, and you can see it's pretty easy to compress in there. It's not a big deal. So I'm going to grab the snap ring and snap it on there, and we'll see how much clearance we have.